path to reaching the comprehensive agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership began under our previous Conservative government. And we would not be here today were it not for the hard work and heavy lifting by Canada's longest-serving and easily argued the best Minister of International Trade in decades, the Honourable Member for Abbotsford. Canada's consumers, entrepreneurs, farmers, miners and manufacturers will benefit under this agreement thanks to the hard work of the member from Abbotsford. For my constituents who faithfully followed the speeches in Parliament and anyone else watching at home, it's necessary to explain the importance of trade and what this trade agreement is all about. Trade agreements are important because 1 out of every 5 Canadian jobs depends on international trade, and these essential trading relationships help generate 60% of our nation's wealth as measured by gross domestic product. CPTPP is a comprehensive agreement for a trans-Pacific trade partnership. It is the current version to the trade agreement with countries of the Pacific Rim signed by our previous Conservative government. It includes 11 countries: Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and Vietnam. It was signed in March of this year, and after the Prime Minister's failures on the North American trade agreement, there now seems to be some attention to trade agreements, which has been lacking by this government. The sense of urgency to pass Bill C-79 and now ratify the CPTPP may be a result of concessions by the Liberal Party to give a foreign country, in this case the United States, veto power over who Canada can sign a trade agreement with. Vietnam, one of the signatories to the CPTPP, is considered a non-market economy. The Liberals, under the terms of the botched NAFTA renegotiation, surrendered Canadian sovereignty. As a result, the United States could exercise the power given to them by the Liberal Party and veto our participation in the CPTPP because of the presence of Vietnam. It did not have to be this way. If the current government had taken the need to be proactive in seeking out new markets for Canadian products seriously, this agreement, which was handed to the current government ready to go, would be in place now, and we would not have to be having this debate so late in the game. Hopefully, after the botched negotiations with the Americans over NAFTA, the Conservative Party, Canada's government-in-waiting, will help this bumbling government get the job done with the trade agreement we handed to them ready to be signed. CPTPP reduces the tariffs in countries representing 13% of the global economy, or a total of $10 trillion. The Peterson Institute for International Economics estimated that the Pacific Rim Trade Agreement version signed by our previous Conservative government would boost Canadian income by over $20 billion over the next decade. The agreement comes into force 60 days after at least 6 signatory countries ratify it, and the deadline to ratify it is February of 2019. After that, we lose our first mover advantage, the way Canada lost out when we came in after the U.S. and Mexico signed a trade agreement to replace NAFTA. Canada will have to play catch-up with the other signatory countries if we continue to delay. Canadians are indeed fortunate of all the heavy lifting done by the previous Conservative government on this trade agreement. Many Canadians I spoke to in the last several months were convinced the Liberal hidden agenda on NAFTA was to fail. The decision by the Liberal Party to sell out to Canadian agricultural producers, in this case dairy farmers, by failing to protect farmers, consumers, and taxpayers during trade negotiations with our largest trading partner is only more bad news for Canadians already suffering from huge debt and huge taxation levels. The sellout was inevitable, considering how badly the Canadian-American relationship has been mismanaged. The Liberal Party responded to the election pledge by the U.S. President to rewrite the North American Free Trade Agreement with a $20 million gift to the Clinton Foundation. Yes, the same U.S. political presidential candidate, Hillary Clinton, who is tapped to participate in the controversial pay-to-play cash for access fundraisers favored by the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party put partisan interests above the good of Canada. Canadian control of Canada's food supply and the efficient use of resources to deliver nutritious, high-quality product from the farm gate to the consumer's kitchen table is at the core of Canada's supply management system. Farmers have not recovered from the last attack on their livelihoods made last summer when the Liberal finance minister started to change the tax laws to make it easier to lose the family farm to foreigners and corporations than it was to pass the family farm on to the next generation. Now, while Conservatives support the family farm as the heart of rural life, food security, just like border security, is a low priority for the selfie Prime Minister, who's obsessed with himself. Conservatives have negotiated dozens of trade deals without losing supply management. We have never been in such a weak negotiating position where supply management could be used as barrier to a trade deal. If Canadian food security was a sticking point to an agreement, that is an indictment of the current government and the extraordinarily weak position it's left Canada in. Hundreds of thousands of Canadian jobs and the overall health of our country depend on trade. This is why Canadians are so fortunate to have had this trade agreement we're discussing today to have been negotiated by our previous Conservative government. A Conservative government would never have been so disrespectful to someone like the political leader of our largest trading partner, whose goodwill so many Canadian jobs depend upon. The United States is Canada's most important trading partner. 20% of Canada's GDP is tied to our commercial relationship with the United States, and over 74% of Canadian exports go to the United States. The member for Toronto University Rosedale should have known better than to appear on a panel with extremists that featured a video slandering the U.S. president right in the middle of sensitive trade negotiations. As Global Affairs Minister, she should have been instructed that the fine art of diplomacy does not tolerate amateurs. The livelihoods of families are at stake. Canadians cannot afford a government that puts its own political interests ahead of the country's economy and Canadian jobs. Conservatives believe in clean air, low taxes, and good jobs in a healthy economy. A clean environment and good-paying jobs are only possible when people are treated with respect. The gains Canadians made from the hard work of our previous Conservative government to cut taxes for all Canadians and successfully negotiate favourable new trade deals are being undone by this Liberal spending government. In their zeal to undo our Conservative legacy on justice for victims, funding for our military, and cutting taxes for low-income Canadians, first and foremost, trade was ignored. Only now has the Liberal Party seen the wisdom in the Conservative policy to pursue multiple trade agreements. The Liberals opposed Conservative cuts to the GST and HST and now propose a bogus carbon tax, which is nothing more than an HST on steroids. A tax is a tax is a tax. And excessive taxation kills Canadian jobs. Conservative trade policy creates jobs. With the CPTPP, this government has embraced our Conservative legacy on trade, and we can be thankful we're passing CPTPP now because the economic future of Canada does not look good under this Liberal spending government. The regressive left have never believed in free trade. Auto workers and pensioners in places like Windsor and St. Catharines tell me they're in mortal fear of losing their jobs and any hope of a comfortable retirement when the carbon tax hits their households. Our Conservative government pursued trade deals among our allies and developing democracies with so much energy because of our vision for Canada and with the confidence Conservatives have in Canadians.
Questions and comments. The honourable member for Kingston and the Islands.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by thanking the member for bringing up the member from Abbotsford and his work in this, because, yeah, you know, I think it's fair to say that this is a process that started under the former government. This government took over that process, and together we were able to, through the work of both parties, be able to produce a good result for Canadians at the end of the day. And there's nothing wrong with every once in a while saying that we agree on something and that we're supportive of each other and that we're working for the same goal. But my question to her is, towards the beginning of her speech, she said, we're trying to ram this through the House, yet moments ago she just voted in favor of a time allocation motion on this. So how can she say that we're trying to ram it through the House, yet she was also just supportive of a time allocation motion on this to force a vote on it?
Well, member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And just because they've been so truant in getting this bill forward doesn't mean that we're going to rule it through without serious debate and letting Canadians know what it's all about. And hopefully it will be passed before the failure of the new agreement with the U.S. And Mexicans comes to pass. And the threat of this TPP deal going by the wayside as a consequence of it.
Questions and comments. Questions et commentaires. J'aimerais informer l'honorable député de Longueuil-Saint-Hubert qu'il y a eu une infraction et je m'excuse, mais je ne peux pas le reconnaître aujourd'hui. Je pense que dans quelques jours, il aura la permission de parler dans la Chambre. Questions et commentaires. The honourable member for Bow River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the colleague and the speech she made and a lot of the things she brought forward. So one of the things she did mention was some of the people who she has worked with before and some of the hard work they have done with trade agreements. I wonder if she could just comment, because she would have known well their history and some of the work they did. And our minister, who is not in the House, former minister is not in the House today, but who did a lot of work on that, maybe she could remind us of some of the tremendous work that he did.
Okay, a minute. The honourable member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Was very instrumental in this trade agreement, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. He managed to, in the middle of fighting an election, get this trade agreement signed. Took time away from his own campaign, and thank goodness, not only got the job done on the TPP, but won his election as well. I'd also like to mention Jerry Ritz, who is a very effective trade minister, and we all worked together on the European trade agreement, the comprehensive agreement, and I'll talk about real consultation. Those ministers go to small communities, not just Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal, and they call in the farming sectors and the other sectors who are going to be impacted potentially by any agreement. Listen to the concerns, take the concerns, and that's what they did. They took the concerns into consideration before they started the negotiating, and that's why we're in a position to pass a trade agreement successfully at this point.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Saskatoon West. We have time for a very brief question, if she doesn't mind.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will make it brief. I would like to ask my honourable colleague, since the CPTPP includes investor state provisions, which do allow investors to sue Canada for regulating, in the public interest on issues like health and the environment, I wonder through you, Mr. Speaker, why does the member support such an agreement with such harmful provisions? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Okay, 1 second. The honourable member for Renfrew, Nipissing, Pembroke.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And it doesn't matter what I did say in my speech or didn't, and I certainly didn't touch on anything that she's just asking about. The point is the NDP would find something wrong with any trade agreement because they don't agree with it. Over the weekend, I was speaking to people who work in the auto manufacturing sector, workers from the line, and even the ones who don't work on the line but were worried about their neighbors and family members who do, and their own businesses, how they would be impacted if the Mexican-U.S.-Canadian trade agreement didn't go through last weekend. And they said, you know, it's so important, not just this one, but it's so important that we had other agreements with other countries so that we can still build autos to go to other places and maybe not have a ghost town in Windsor.
Resuming debate, reprise du débat, the honourable member for Guelph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in the House to support Bill C-79 today, the implementation of the Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. You know, Mr. Speaker, we live in unprecedented times.